Hello, this is Todd Danielson, the Editorial Director for Informed Infrastructure. In addition to our regular content that helps our audience of civil and structural engineers do their jobs better, we wanted to put together some useful information about how they can best adapt to the new working reality related to the coronavirus pandemic. Some companies were able to adjust quickly and smoothly without a hitch, while some have experienced severe growing pains and dysfunction. Wherever you fit into that spectrum, we hope the following tips and experiences from key industry companies and their executives can help now and in the long term, as many of these new workflows are likely to stick around, perhaps permanently. We hope you find this a useful exercise, and we thank you for your continued support through these difficult times.
I'm Kevin Cornish, and I work for AECom, a very large global engineering and construction company focused on the engineering side. My position at AECom is I oversee our surface transportation market segment in North America. And to give you a sense of scale for that, that's about $1 billion piece of AECom's roughly $20 billion annual revenue portfolio. So AECom, as you know, is a global company, but I'm focused on the Americas.
Yeah, Andy Kayala with Lane Construction. We're a subsidiary of the Cellini and Progillo Group. I'm the Vice President of Bid Development. We've got about 8,000 employees here in the States and somewhere around 40,000 around the world.
Hi, I'm Dustin Parkman with Bentley Systems, Vice President of our Project Delivery Division.
Okay, so how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed how your company works and how your office works?
Well, I'm based in Florida, in Orlando, Florida. So your question around offices, our office is pretty typical for most of our significant metropolitan area offices. A couple hundred people are based in the Orlando office. And our offices remain open for the most part. Engineering and construction is considered an essential work effort through federal legislation and state legislation. So we are open for business at our office, but we have encouraged our staff to work remotely from home. So while our office remains open here in Orlando and in most or all locations, our staff is being encouraged and largely is working from home right now.
Obviously, we're remote working as much as possible. There's, being encouraged to keep as many people who can be productive working at home. And we've actually had quite a lot of success with that. Our IT department did a great job of making sure everybody was prepared to be in a remote telecommuting type of environment. So I think as far as just normal day-to-day operations and how we go about doing our business, things have largely been surprisingly seamless. I think that people have gotten better at using platforms like this, using Zoom, using other, video platforms for taking care of critical meetings. So as far as the day-to-day, just, email correspondence, all the things that you need to do to keep the business moving, I think it's gone well. The things that are a challenge is just the unknown element of it. You have personnel who it's a little bit more difficult to keep people engaged over the long term. When you're talking about 2 or 3 weeks, that's okay. You start to get into 2 months. And now as managers, it's difficult to make sure that people are staying engaged, feeling part of the team, and being as productive as possible. So there's been some challenges on that side of things, I think. Just from technology in general, I think it's forced us to rethink some of the platforms that we're going to be using in the future to be more efficient.
So as Bentley and being a technology company, we really weren't heavily affected by the impacts of the pandemic. We were already very equipped to work from home. In fact, a large majority of our workforce does work from home or travels frequently. So essentially, we have kind of this backpack or campfire mentality where, at any given point, everything we need can fit into a backpack in order and allow us to do our business as usual. So Other than, the obvious of closing some offices and requiring everyone to work from home, we really only had a minimal amount of disruption. And so being a technology company, you kind of got to eat your own dog food, so to speak, and be really ready to embrace going digital. So going digital is something that we at Bentley have been talking about for a number of years for the engineering, construction, and owner-operator spaces for infrastructure. And it really allowed us to test our own mettle, so to speak.
Okay, so how are you using technology to overcome these obstacles, and how much of it were you using before this all happened?
We were using a lot of it before all this happened. So AECOM was pretty agile and able to adapt fairly quickly. There were, there's being the size and scale that we are, there were pockets that had maybe some more issues than others, but overall, all of our staff in all of our offices, whether they're administrative staff or management staff, engineering staff, all work off of laptops. And when we're in an office environment, hook up to a dock station. And so we were very readily able to adapt by allowing our staff to, well, obviously it's easy to take a laptop home, but we also allowed our staff to take their monitors home and their dock stations if they would like to. And then it's a matter of your, internet connectivity from your house. And so for the most part, again, I'm in Orlando, it's a metropolitan area, it's good internet access throughout the entire region. That is the case for the most part. But of course, some more remote locations or certain instances where connectivity to someone's house, which is an individual thing, there are some challenges there. But within our IT infrastructure, as I relayed on the Bentley press conference, there are some limitations working through a VPN type of connection. So we have a pretty robust IT group, and they did make some adjustments to our VPN connections. But even more importantly, so that we weren't so reliant on having to have a VPN connection to our local servers, we moved a lot of our design information up into the cloud, where you don't need that VPN connection to access the files. So that we adapted very readily to the situation.
Yeah, we've been on a path to trying to basically digitize the construction site, right? I think people used to talk about paperless environments and things like that, and we're headed down a path to have that a fully digitized management platform with our construction sites. So you've got various project management platforms that are being utilized we're testing now. Bentley Synchro being one of them. I think the Bentley Synchro platform is the one that really is able to synchronize the multiple inputs and the various players across a broad range of stakeholders. But we are using some other ones that, I guess the current environment really puts pressure on an already developing initiative. So you get better faster. You work out the bugs quicker because you're forced to do it, or you just can't do business. So I would say we really haven't changed the trajectory, but we've probably accelerated it.
Okay, since you've got a lot of good experience, could you maybe share some advice and some tips for how to do this for those of our audience who are kind of new to this?
Absolutely. So I think at a first principle level, having a good strategy that comes from your CIO's office. I think Bentley with Claire Rutowski, who is our CEO, has a great strategy for mobilizing our workforce very quickly. So she kind of led the helm, so to speak, when this all took place. She assimilated the teams, made sure the communication was effective and people knew how to transition from a work from office culture to a work from home culture, particularly for people who were accustomed to actually working in an office every single day. So do they have the right hardware? Do they have the right broadband connection? Do they have the VPN connections and all the security? Does their local country and city have the actual policies that'll enable them to work from home? So they're, in the US, we don't think about some of those things as much, but in a lot of countries, for example, they didn't really have great work from home labor laws and policies that actually enable them to really kind of mobilize very quickly. So we saw some of that geographically, where you would see workforce really go down, their productivity just essentially come to a halt. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is a lot of those governments that had, maybe not, had somewhat been dragging their feet in regards to these types of policies, this pandemic allowed them to basically compress what amounted to years worth of policy and work, and really got it done in a matter of weeks. So it's kind of helped catapult them into this going digital era, with everything, making sure people have mobile computing resources, making sure they have the broadband that they need, making sure they have the office resources at their home to be productive as normal.
Patience, when there are people that are not accustomed to working in this type of environment, that have to be supportive of those people, and some patience involved till they get acclimated to working from home. And in my own circumstance, my kids are grown and out of college, type of thing. So I don't have, some people are really challenged with schools being, closed, and they have really juggling multiple tasks at home, trying to keep up with their AECom work. At the same time, they're playing teacher to 1, 2, 5 kids, whatever the case might be, right? So there's some patience involved there, and understanding that people's first priority is their health and their family, and work is very important too. So that's some learning through all of that, and some patience through all of that.
So on the personnel side, I think daily check-in meetings, it sounds simple. It's not really a high-tech thing, but we're not machines, and people need to continue to be engaged, feel part of the team, regardless of the technology that you're going to use. Don't forget that picking up the phone and talking to people is really important, and that personal interaction actually helps facilitate some of the technology conversations. And I think it's important not to forget that. As far as just maybe on the technology side, it would take me a little bit longer, because like I said, we haven't changed the trajectory. It's just accelerated the things that we're trying to do, so you're working out bugs quicker. Maybe something as simple as make sure you're focused on actionable steps. Don't fall in love with the technology to the point where you think that the technology becomes the answer. The technology is a tool to be deployed to find the answers. If you get that reversed, I think people start to think that just the right software platform is going to solve my problems, and that's not true. It's just another tool.
Okay, what would you describe as perhaps some of the biggest drawbacks from working remotely?
I guess it would depend on the function that you have within the company. So, I was a nomad going to airports most week and traveling remotely most of the time. So for someone like myself, it was not that significant. I would say where it does pay, at the end of the day, what we're focused on is delivering engineering solutions for our clients. And that's large teams of designers and engineers and technicians and administrative support. And so, the collaborative nature of being in an office is certainly different. when everybody's sitting at home. So you adapt as best you can using mediums like we're on here with Skype or with Teams or with GoToMeeting or, the host of different virtual platforms. But in terms of your question about drawbacks, I would say it's that teams do like to be together and work together. So and we hope to get back to a new normal where we're back in that office environment to a large extent.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the same thing. It's just keeping people engaged. That trying to it is when it's a short-term thing. I think there's actually a novelty to it that people think, hey, we get to do this a little different, and there's a learning curve, and everybody's trying to figure it out, and they're focused on that, and it goes pretty well. I think when you start to drag out into months, now you've got some challenges, and I think a lot of companies are working through it and trying to solve it a little differently. Rotational things in through the office and making sure that people have what they need.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that many, including myself, have really struggled with is the off switch. Working from home and really not having a really busy social life either. And you don't really have anywhere to be, so to speak. So it's kind of hard to turn the work off. So I think, in the first 6 weeks of this, I think people were really just kind of working crazy hours because they really didn't have anything else to do. What you've seen in the past few weeks is people are starting to transition back to a normal kind of work, home life balance, even though it's kind of weird, home work balance. But when you're always in your home, you still have to strike that right balance of getting work done and being productive, but also making time for your loved ones and things like that.
So the next question, how much of all of this do you think is going to be permanent changes that will be incorporated once all this is over? And how many of these things that we're doing now do you think are temporary and will be forgotten about or not used once things get relatively back to normal?
Now we adapted quickly. People are able to work remotely. We'll be able to evaluate some metrics around the efficiency of all of that in due time. I think it takes we're not going to be able to figure that out in a matter of weeks. It's going to take a few months of working remotely and all the considerations around as you're doing these design projects, whether they're small or large. We have to check our work, the quality of our work. That's changed a little bit in an office environment. We're printing things out. So in a home environment, using the quality process as the example, which is incredibly important. Definitely have to make some adjustments in that regard. Checking electronic work products. How do you do that effectively? Making sure that the deliverables are checked and ready to go out the door. So I would say that's a good example there of we will get much more proficient at things like the quality assurance of our designs working remotely. And that will be something that we'll then be able to say we've figured that out. And we're comfortable with the QA procedures that are in place when we're working remotely, and that'll stick for good.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a horizon out there somewhere where we will go back to normal. This isn't the first time that there's been a new virus crop up in the population, so there is going to be a time when we go back to a normal. How far out there that is, we don't really know right now. Is it a year or 2 years or 3 years? So right now, we're trying to figure out, interestingly, how is the contract framework going to be affected by something like this? It's new to everybody. What are we going to do? And to keep people focused on still producing and not being distracted by the newness of it and all the novelty of it, that, well, what if the client does this? And what if we do that? And how are we going to be able to continue to work together? And don't get distracted by that. Try to stay focused on we are still going to be able to produce work. In some locations, we've had actually an increase in productivity because there's not as much traffic on the road. So we're able to do more work because we're able to stay on the road longer and there's not as many traffic restrictions. So I think we always seem to be able to find our way back to we got used to it. When things are new, there's fear involved, and fear ends up driving poor decision making. Once we get through that, okay, I understand the facts. I can navigate this new world. Once you get to that point, now I think things tend to go back to the, like a normal productivity.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question, good question, but a difficult question to answer. I think a lot of the workforce activities, I think, will be around here to stay. I think most organizations that were either already very digital, very mobile, they were able to actually realize a lot of the investments they had been making by staying current with technology. So, for example, just like I said, Bentley did not really skip a beat from an operational standpoint. Many of our users also didn't miss a beat, and we were able to see that, right, in their activity and using systems and the communications and outreach that we've had with them. A lot of these organizations were really, really well prepared for this. But then you had another tier of users that were caught flat-footed, right? They didn't have the necessary IT infrastructure. They didn't have the right systems. They didn't have good collaboration platforms, whether that be the generic type of collaboration platforms like the Zooms and Skypes and Teams, much less more sophisticated collaboration environments, particularly for engineering and construction and kind of capital program management that ProjectWise provides. So dialing back, I think a lot of the mobility, the appetite for collaboration solutions and technology, I think that's here to stay. Because I think most people will say, well, we want to be better prepared, not if another pandemic happens, but for when a pandemic or a natural disaster happens, we have a mobile workforce that can continue to be productive and keep our business going. On the flip side, on the social side, the home side of this, I think everybody's ready for a real happy hour and not a Zoom happy hour. I think that will not last the test of time.
Okay, how do you foresee the economic impact of all this shaking out, both short-term and long-term, but particularly in just the infrastructure, AEC, and construction industries?
That's a tough one. There's some really big impacts that are more immediate. I personally am focused on our highways and bridges surface transportation market. Obviously, AECOM does a lot of different things, both in the transportation space and buildings and environmental and water. So your question, it really needs to be drilled down into the different market segments, because I think the impacts are different in the different market segments. Our private business, there's some more immediate impacts because those private businesses have to react quickly to what's occurred. They often slow down their capital expenditures. Whereas on the public side, which I'm more focused on, public infrastructure, it's different. It's less impactful perhaps, but even in public infrastructure, the impacts were immediate in aviation. They were immediate in transit. In the highway and bridge world, those impacts are going to take a little bit longer to manifest themselves in programs slowing down. We hope that doesn't happen, but and a big factor of that will be federal assistance and stimulus, which a couple of stimulus packages obviously have already happened, which have helped aviation and transit. The House just passed well, they didn't pass. They put forward a bill yesterday. It's likely the House will be voting on it by the end of the week. A $3 trillion stimulus package. I don't think that's going to be immediately embraced by the Senate. So the usual wranglings in DC, but that's another very important element to your question. There will be significant impacts. There are significant impacts, but how will those impacts be mitigated to some extent through federal stimulus in the case of public infrastructure?
Yeah, from my limited vantage point, I'll answer that question. But I think that some of the areas that are going to be affected are obviously the mass transit, public transportation, airline industry, those kinds of things. It's going to take longer for this to work through the system. Straight road building projects, there's probably going to be more people in their cars and on the road. So that will probably bounce back relatively quickly. But I think there's going to be some rethinking of, the kind of mass public transportation.
Yeah, I think it's still hard to tell. I mean, there's a bunch of different trends that are actually taking place. So I'll start off with like kind of the government sector. You have different organizations doing different things. You have transportation providers. They're actually able to do construction now in areas and at peak usage times that they would have never been able to do before. So a lot of them had a backlog of projects that could have been held up due to maintenance of traffic or safety concerns or just disruption of the natural throughput of the economy. This has given them a window to kind of expedite some of those, particularly in dense urban areas. Construction, we're seeing projects get accelerated because there's not as many people on the streets. There's not as much retail and commercial activity going on. Storefronts are closed. So you could do some things, particularly with underground utilities, underground drainage, that would have normally been extremely disruptive to an urban center that right now is not that disruptive. So we're seeing that happen, get accelerated. We're also seeing capital move from construction outside of the urban areas to design. And so most government areas are anticipating some level of stimulus that's going to come for construction. So they're leveraging their existing capital budget to kind of accelerate their design, make sure they've got a strong bench, so to speak, for construction when and if that stimulus funding comes. On the private sector, we've seen kind of a mixed set of trends. Vertical construction, commercial construction has slowed down a little bit. It's hard to say whether that's to stay or if that's just a blip. Particularly areas where you have construction in tight areas where people are not able to kind of live with the social distancing aspects of construction as much as they would say on large scale infrastructure or linear infrastructure. You've seen them try to change their workforce patterns. They're doing things in different bits and bytes so that they can do construction without a mass of people in tight quarantine areas. Working on different disciplines, different trades. So that I think the vertical construction market, I think it's still too early to tell as to what the long-term ramifications will be. I think many businesses will realize that, hey, this wasn't as disruptive to our normal order of business as we thought it might have been. Maybe we don't need as much of these physical spaces that we had before. So I think the long-term ramifications of that are really still unclear. I think it will is no doubt going to have a change though on the built world. I think all aspects of it will have some level of impact.
Can you share at all what Bentleys thinking about for its own economic impact?
So for our own economic impact, so our strategy that we've had for the past few years really hasn't changed. We are continually and maybe in some cases accelerating our transition to SaaS native solutions for all of our product lines. I think we were already well on that path. I think this has, if anything, just validated that theory more than ever, that acceleration towards that end is the right way to go, providing more mobility to our users, the whole idea of digital twins and going digital and providing tools that allow the world to be more resilient is still within our first principles, and I don't think this has changed it. On the flip side, how has it disrupted our business? I think in the short term, we had to deal with certain geographies where they didn't have the right infrastructure to work from home. So therefore, obviously, if they don't have the right computing power to do graphic intensive things, or if they don't have the right broadband connection, they can't leverage the cloud as much as they would. Maybe we didn't have the right data center close enough to some of these more rural areas. So a lot of those types of things are getting calibrated, so to speak. So that's been a little disruption there, but not too much. And now you're starting to see this wave of people come back online, even those areas that, like China, for example, India, for example, Indonesia. These were areas that kind of went dark for a period of time, and now they're coming back online. They have the policies in place within their governments. They now have the technology, the broadband, the work from home laptops and things like that in order to do this. So that's probably the only disruption that we had, and I would have said that was probably in our mid-tier customer base, our top end customer base, the large multinational global engineering, construction, and owner operators. For the most part, outside of government, they were already very well equipped and really didn't skip a beat. We did see in the government sectors, however, globally, they were not really well prepared for this. So there was a fair amount of air gap there between. But now we're kind of back to normal.
Okay, I've got an open-ended question for you. Could you tell something, maybe one thing that really either good or bad surprised you besides being caught in the situation completely?
For me personally, it's been a real adjustment. I'm used to going to the airports at least 3 weeks of the month and traveling off somewhere, working with our teams or for client needs or for conferences. So I guess that's more of a reality than a surprise, but it's just been, and the longer this goes on, it's I guess it's not surprising, but it's more uncertain. Like, how long will this go on like this? Living in the state of Florida, we're opening back up already to some degree. Most states are making some attempt to do that. But when you look across the landscape of the U.S. And North America, for that matter, it's the different states are all addressing this in their own manner to try to reopen, and there has been some surprises in there. States like Georgia rushing out very quickly to reopen, and then others that seem to be being very cautious and conservative and pushing off stay-at-home orders. Some states now well into we're into May already, but all the way into June. So I think there's more surprises yet to come, perhaps in some of the reopening realities, and some states continuing to hunker down more than others.
So I'll be as blunt as I can. I was surprised at how fearful people can be when things are just unknown. I know that we're prone to that, but it is also a surprise to see not people lose their heads necessarily, but that we start to make decisions out of fear. And I think that's across the spectrum. I think it starts with kind of our political leadership. It moves into some of the administrative people in various government entities, right down through HR departments and companies and people who are making decisions, not always dealing with facts, but dealing with fear. And it was a little bit of a surprise to me to see how quickly it happened, that we went from, everybody's going to the ball game and the concert to everything shut down overnight. And I think some of that had to do with fear more than facts.
I think there's been a lot of surprises. I think one of the surprises, right when it first happened in the first coming weeks, I think everyone was, still in that doom and gloom era, right, of the unknown and what this was going to mean to our business, to our own personal lives, and so on. I think we were very surprised to see how resilient and how prepared the majority of our user base was for disaster, and the fact that they were able to continue doing business. I don't think we also weren't prepared for the appetite for collaboration software to be such an influx and increase all of a sudden. I don't think anyone saw that coming, particularly for things like ProjectWise or our Synchro line of products that focus on collaboration for engineering and construction firms. A lot of people realized they needed that, right? That maybe they were just using basic stuff for sharing information, whether that be OneDrive or Zoom or Teams. They needed better tools for their craft to actually collaborate. So I think in some cases we've seen increased usage of our products as a result of the situation. So everybody has acknowledged there's a necessity of going digital, and I think since we're in the going digital business, it's been good for us.
Okay, continuing with Bentley questions. So I'm assuming you've been talking to a lot of your customers lately. What are some of the things that they're still concerned about, and how is your company working toward helping them fix and alleviate their concerns?
With the event taking place, there's obviously everyone's taking a look at their own cloud strategies, and new cloud strategies also bring into the account of data sovereignty and things like that, and security. So people who had on-premise systems for doing their business as usual, and now they're making that decision to go to the cloud, go to SaaS native solutions. There's a lot of questions that they don't necessarily have answered, and from country to country, there are deviations, there are certifications, there are security protocols, there's data sovereignty issues. Having to work through a lot of that in bite-sized chunks has been a little bit of a challenge. But one of the things that's really kind of helped us through that is we don't do all that ourselves. We partner with Microsoft. In fact, our new ProjectWise 365 platform that we introduced for COVID-19 and waiving the subscription fees actually integrates with Microsoft Office platform, the 365 platform with Teams. It leverages all of that. And so we're using Microsoft's Azure cloud stack as kind of our baseline to kind of solve a lot of those hard, typical cloud IT infrastructure issues. That's not really our core competency. We want to be focused on the users and the productivity applications for construction, for engineering, for infrastructure owners, and leave that IT infrastructure piece to Microsoft to solve for us.
We're a very resilient company. We are weathering the storm, and we plan to do just that. We are making every effort we can to deliver our work for our clients, which we are. And we're also making, very impressed with our executive management, and in terms of very much demonstrating a commitment to our staff for staff retention, not being short-sighted. At the end of the day, like most businesses, we're an engineering firm, but this is a people business. We get this stuff done with good staff and good people, and so it would be very short-sighted to overreact. Our company's making some very calculated and smart choices right now about very focused on staff retention and keeping our people employed and delivering our work to our clients. So we're weathering the storm fairly well, very well actually so far.
I've talked to some of the engineering side. What do you think the major differences are to how this has affected construction versus the engineers and the designers?
That's a good question. I mean, I think construction, we're a lot, depends on the construction site, of course, but we can tend to be much more interactive on the site. But then the engineers are largely in an office environment where it had to happen quickly, where they were distributed to their various locations and had to continue working. As far as our construction sites, I got to be honest, I've been surprised that we've largely continued to function. And most of the clients, we've been considered critical infrastructure, so we've continued to build the work and put the work in place. And so I think it's a positive that we've been able to do that. And I think probably a difference against some of the other players in the industry, because we've been able to continue to do work as we were doing it before. Obviously, with the caveat that there are increased safety requirements and things that we need to follow, but we've largely been able to keep our sites moving.